there are, I think Heather told me yesterday, there are about 190 individual things in this exhibition. And rather than talk about each one in detail, I'm just going to kind of whisk through and give you a general idea of the shape of the exhibition. But as Christoph said, this does kind of connect very closely with what we're trying to do in the photography collection. One of the great strengths of the photography collection is landscape photography, going back to the 1850s and 1860s. And in order to build on that strength and make the collection current, we're collecting a lot of contemporary stuff that looks rather different from what you might expect. One of the reasons it does is that the landscape is always changing. Any of you who drive around Denver notice that the urban landscape looks a little bit different every day or every week. There's very little you can do about it. And I don't understand why we would expect photography to remain static and unchanging in the light of the way the world changes all around us. So this exhibition involves, it's kind of a tidal wave of new stuff by contemporary photographers who are using a lot of experimental techniques and unusual materials in order to look at landscape in new ways. The first thing you'll see in the exhibition is this gigantic 12 by 18 foot wooden representation of a wave by Clifford Ross, who tied a rope around his waist and waded into the surf to photograph waves generated by hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean. Moving through the exhibition, we open with an area which kind of engages what I guess are traditional thoughts about landscape, but in new ways. So these are photographs of deserts, photographs of our national parks, replications of famous photographs by the great early 20th century photographers like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, and images of glaciers. And all of these are approached in new and unusual ways that I think place a little more emphasis on the image, but yet engage ideas about landscape and the environment that concern all of us in today's world. Moving on from there, we have images that look like landscapes, but where no camera was necessarily involved. These are just things that were invented in the darkroom, and they raise the question of what is a landscape? If you see something that looks like a lake or a ridgeline or a sand dune, and a horizon and sky, is it a landscape or is it just an idea of a landscape? We don't know. You'll come around the corner and see this magnificent piece, which is a panorama by Matthew Brandt. It's 16 feet wide. It's a photograph of Lake Isabella in California, which you can see right here. And after he made the photograph, he collected buckets of water from the lake, went back to his studio, made the prints, and then just submerged them in lake water for several weeks and let the lake water interact and work on the materials in the photograph until parts of it got up and floated around. And a picture like this makes me think about landscape and how we treat and regard images, photographs, paintings, other things of landscapes. In a way, they're like mementos of places where we've been or things that we've seen. And in other ways, they're symbols of the places where we might like to go. Now, I'm not sure that I want to go to a place that looks like this. It would be a little strange and disorienting. But I think one of the things about this picture is that, to me, it talks about, or it addresses the issue of memory and how a photograph, we think of a photograph as somehow commemorating our moment at a place out in the landscape, but our memories without the photographs begin to fade and get kind of blotchy. And here Matthew Brandt is kind of reminding us of how that all works. Sandra Kantanen. There's several Finnish photographers in this exhibition. The Finns are doing a lot of very interesting stuff. For those of you who are interested in the technical stuff, she's using a technique called focus stacking and manipulating the stacked images to create these wonderful, very delicate images of water and flowers. local photographers such as Andrew Beckham. Andrew Beckham spent a couple of years just in 1 square mile of forest up near Evergreen, making pictures and getting to know the place intimately. And then you'll encounter this. This is a SketchUp rendering. The piece is mostly installed now, and it's pretty wild. These are images of a rainforest in Hawaii, where the photographer made the pictures and then rolled them up in burlap or other textiles and buried them, sometimes for months, and he would dig them up every once in a while and look at them. So parts of the images remain and look photographic, but in other places the images have taken on some of the shape and texture of the textiles in which they were wrapped, and in other places the image has basically been erased or devoured by microbes and organisms in the soil. And what this, to me, represents is that process of growth and decay that makes the rainforest what it is. Smart stuff. There's a section called Intervention, where we have things like this photograph where the artist has photographed the landscape where his family has logged and lived for over 200 years. Those red dots indicate places where his ancestors made serious mistakes that impaired the health of the forest and damaged the environment. On the right, those vertical magenta lines indicate places where he went in and replanted the forest with tiny seedlings in order to restore it to health. Photographs of fossil trees. In this case, a fossil tree that no one thought existed in real life, but one was discovered and has been propagated and now exists in botanical gardens all over the world. Also, photographers who intervene in the landscape to make pictures. Here, Rita Paivalainen has draped a piece of winter camouflage from the Finnish army in a tree. And here, the photographer Paula McCartney has wired tiny little wooden birds from the hobby shop into trees and shrubs in order to photograph them. There are images of human landscapes, such as this one by Valerie Annex, who photographed a housing development in Ireland 3 years after the worldwide recession hit in 2008. These houses were brand spanking new when the recession hit, and 3 years later they were still unoccupied. Staged photographs like this one by Gregory Crudson, who shut down the whole city and worked with the police and the fire department and the shop owners to create a tableau in order to photograph it. Larson Schindelman, it's actually Nate Larson and Marnie Schindelman, who use the geotags from tweets to identify places where Twitter messages have been sent, from which they've been sent. And they go back to those places later and photograph the place, and the tweet becomes the caption to the photograph. So in this case, it says, "Amy is dying at Highland Hospital." Reminds us that every landscape shows some or involves some hidden things that are often unknowable and that are really important and meaningful. We have pictures like these of things that people build and that ultimately decay. So Richard Misrak's photo of a test piece of a U.S.-Mexico border wall in Texas, there on the left, looking a lot like a piece of playground equipment, but ultimately more serious than that. And on the right, Ursula Schultz-Dornberg's photograph of a bus stop in Armenia that was built by the Soviet government and has not been maintained for about 40 years now. Dirt. Got to have dirt in a landscape show. Jennifer Colton's photograph on the left, it shows the surface of a landfill. And on the right, I just have to talk about this for a little minute. This is a photograph by Matthew Brandt. The photograph itself came from Denver Public Library. It's an image of the Globe smelter. You can just see the top of the smelter. It was a 300-foot-tall brick smokestack that was blown up in 1948 to make way for construction of the Denver Coliseum. Matthew Brandt went out to the Coliseum last year, collected dust, which at least is theoretically a remnant of this demolition, and used that dust to create the image. So he's producing photographs that reach back through time, at least hypothetically, and connect us with those bystanders who were watching the event 70 years ago. We have these great kind of abstract photos by David Maisel, Edward Bertensky, and our own local photographer, Gary Emrich, which address issues of water purity, the idea of the pristine environment, and the effects of consumerism on the environment. And then to cheer everybody up, we go into the cosmos with photographs by Penelope Umbrico, Sharon Harper, and I think there's another one here, and Chris McCaw. You go through the tunnel into the Martin McCormick Gallery, where it's all about water and the sky, with images like this beautiful cyanotype photograph by Megan Riepenhoff. A terrific picture of a water surface in Bangkok by the German photographer Andreas Gursky. Thank you, Christoph, for helping us borrow that. Denver photographer Sami Al-Karim's dream sequence. And this terrific photograph by Sonja Brass, a German photographer who actually goes out in the field to make pictures of things like this canyon, and then makes very large prints, mounts them, sets them up in her studio, and in this case lit a fire behind it to create the smoke and replicate the effects of a forest fire deep in the jungles of Venezuela. Thank you very much.